First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me. When I responded positively, I didn't know that I should be the speaker after Karen O'Brien's excellent speech and Björn Ola and Victoria's overview of the concept of transformation. But I will make it a try to say something. The German sociologist Ulrich Beck made his breakthrough with this book, The Risk Society. It was published in 1986, a few weeks after the Chernobyl disaster. And in this book, he paints a rather dark view of social development. Society is no longer characterized by the wealth it produces, but by the risk it generates. In the 20th century, society has managed to solve the problem of poverty through material growth and better distribution of wealth. This growth has required strong institutions in the form of nation state, science, and planning. But over time, it became clear that this positive development also had a negative side. Material growth has unintended consequences, not least that of environmental risk of an unprecedented magnitude. But after several books about society as part of the risk society, Ulrich Beck became increasingly interested in a completely different aspect. What opportunities for change and action arises from the fact that society is characterized more and more by the risk it generates? Global risks that are of such character that a modern welfare society is incapable of developing appropriate institutional responses. And in his last book from 2015, he chose to discuss this question systematically, or whether society is fundamentally changing without us seeing it. Could it be that during this dark development, the conditions are being created for radical societal transformation? Beck chooses to not use the word transformation, but metamorphosis. And the reason for that is, according to him, that transformation thinking is still based on our current understanding of society. Metamorphosis means the stabilization of the institutions and certainties of the modern society and the emergence of new certainties and new institutions and new normative horizons. He asserts that it is mainly unintended, often unnoticed events and processes that trigger fundamental shocks. In the wildfire in Los Angeles, we find what Ulrich Beck calls ecological expropriation. Risk systematically produced, generated by society, destroy the value of properties. But it's not only environmental disaster that expropriate properties, it's increasingly our anticipation of disaster that devalues capital. Disaster can thus function as an eye-opener for our vulnerability, and thereby it can motivate action. And Beck talks about emancipatory catastrophes, which can lead to a cosmopolitan turn. The awareness of risk can create new normative horizons. Some would say that Beck's analysis can be dismissed as being too speculative or having insufficient amount of empirical data for his statements. But what I find important is his contribution that he points at the risk of falling into the trap of presentism, seeing the present as stable without alternatives. He even notes that climate pessimism is based on a generalized incapacity or unwillingness to rethink fundamental question of social and political change. Another important contribution is the failure can be agents of change. Illustrating with the climate issue, Beck turns the common question on its head. He doesn't ask, what can we do about climate change? But instead he asking, what is climate change doing to us? How is it changing the order of society and politics? And in this way, global environmental change is an agent of social change. For Beck, the metamorphosis of the world is almost opposite of a deliberate programmatic change in society. Like the emergence of the modern society, it is unplanned. An unplanned processes on macro level, where industrialization, urbanization, rationalization is the most common one to refer to. But Beck, as well as many other social theorists, also stresses that the role of agency, that human responses to change situations are also a driving force and can be part of the transformation of society. Although much transformation is unplanned and unanticipated, we also have examples of intentional and planned social change. This is a picturesque example. It's the introduction of the right-hand traffic in Sweden in September the 3rd of 1967, involving 8,000 policemen and 100,000 volunteers. It did not entail any profound change of society or the structure of society, but it shows that it's not enough to introduce something new, something old must also be dismantled. And it's not enough to develop new policy and regulation, but also to change practices of actors. The introduction of right-hand traffic was preceded by information campaigns, symbols, banners, stickers, music events, just to mention a few of all the efforts made. In social science, it is common to think in terms of actor and structure, individual and society, micro and macro. It's a pedagogical way of thinking. There is no society without people, and there is no people without society. At the same time, we run the risk of not seeing society in its entirety. The French sociologist Bruno Latour is one of those who has emphasized this most clearly with his actor network theory. He questions, in fact, the use of the social, where it's used in an undefined way to explain phenomena. Instead, he argues we need to go behind it and see what things, practices, and networks are hidden behind what he calls the social. When we do that, we see biological entities, technical artifacts, social practices, people and networks that together make up what is called the social. There are more of us than we thought, as he puts it. This is just an example from how ChatGPT involves so much more than a technical tool. With this figure, my colleague Magnus Booth and I try to clarify what the social consists of, not society, because society is more than that, but the social. And we argue here that the transformation should take place to account of all 5 facets of these aspects. This to avoid as much as possible of unintended consequences, loss of legitimacy and backlash. So inner life, about thoughts and feelings of individual people, but also of groups. It's social relations and interactions, which are guided by social position, habits and norms and beliefs. Social material entities and practices, for example, apps, home, physical, technical, digital, and infrastructure, and all where we all are involved in and dependent on. Stratification refers to gender, ethnicity, class and age that heavily influence living conditions and life chances, and also deeply affect how we act, feel and think about various things. And of course institutions, which consist of positions, norms and values which create enduring organized patterns of human life and social activities. There may be better ways of conceptual in society. What is important is to not reduce the complexity of society too much, because then proposal for transformative change may look good on paper but will not work in practice. Or they will work in practice but lead to a lot of unintended consequences. Let's turn to the other topic of my presentation, that of scientific challenges. Expertise takes many forms, can be organized differently, take different positions, operate at different scales, and provide different types of advices, and have different target group. There are many different challenges for expertise. For example, questions such as how to deal with uncertainties in all its dimensions, how to deal with knowledge ignorance, how to handle intra-scientific disagreement, how to make knowledge move from science to other spheres of society. I will just take one of these challenges. Expertise is mainly often defined as a social position in society for authoritatively delivering recommendation for action within a particular knowledge domain. To become and be an expert, you need to have competence, and that's knowledge and skills, know what and know how. And this knowledge competence is learned through training and socialization. It's recognized by others, otherwise they don't take advice from you. It should be requested and understood and also trusted, both by the scientific community that you represent and the target group that you are communicating to. But who is an expert on transformative change? Who can be an expert on transformative change? The enormous complexity of global environmental challenges and the breadth and depth of these challenges make this a very relevant question. For example, Karen mentioned the EPAS, transformative change. I can mention the IPCC's latest assessment report, which involved almost 800 experts, reviewed more than 66,000 articles, received more than 200 comments on its draft, and the 3 assessment reports run to more than 8,000 pages. Even if experts with broad disciplinary and communicative competence can present assessment, most of what they present are far beyond their own competence. Sometimes, I think we have experienced this, the tension between competence and recognition. The problem is not the upper quadrant to the left or the lower to the right. The more problematic is when a person or organization with real competence are not questioned or silenced. And very problematic is when a person or organization are incompetent on a field or for an issue, but nevertheless takes an expert role. And I guess that you all have experienced that someone that are not experts in your own field, nevertheless, without any hesitation, takes the role and says something about your own, the area where you own have competence. This is a very crude and simplified picture, but it captures the challenge of being an expert. Within the field of expert studies, the British sociologists Harry Collins and Rob Evans have devoted much time to elaborate on what expertise is. They distinguish between different kinds of expert and the competence that characterize them. Primary source knowledge means that the person can read and understand a scientific text, but is not able to critically evaluate it. Interactional expertise means that the person can understand it correctly and take part in a scientific conversation in the field, but lacks the skills to contribute with knowledge to the field. And contributory expertise means that the person has acquired the skills necessary to contribute to a field of knowledge. In science, it is primarily the researcher's contributory expertise that is required. For expertise, that is not sufficient. Besides being able to assess a knowledge field and produce knowledge within a field, an expert also needs to relate and synthesize knowledge from other fields and to frame and package it in a way that is understandable and relevant to target groups. Interactional expertise is also required to become an expert. This places high demands on the expertise and expert organization, as it must integrate knowledge both about ecological and social processes and include knowledge both about the current situation and guidance for action, and must do it in a way understandable for its target groups and legitimate for the scientific community it represents. That is, both external and internal credibility are crucial. So, to wrap up this presentation, to be an expert for transformative change, it is an institutional rather than an individual position. Transformative change is largely a collective enterprise. But this collective expertise is at the same time dependent on individual experts that have both contributory and interactional expertise. The challenge lies not only in the increasing number of knowledge fields that the global environmental challenge includes, but their interconnectedness. It's no longer sufficient to synthesize knowledge about ecological and social processes, but also to synthesize knowledge about the dynamics between them. This is exactly what Ulrich Beck points out. Environmental change and social changes are dynamically interrelated, and any understanding of the environmental challenges and possible solutions must include that. And to have this expertise, it requires training in form of socialization, but also belonging to a community of specialists. And we can ask, where are the sites today in the scientific community where researchers can develop both contributory and interactional expertise? There also need to balance internal and external credibility. On the one hand, disciplinary research is needed to develop knowledge and validate scientific findings, and criticism is an important part in this enterprise. On the other hand, it is not enough to be able to develop disciplinary knowledge. The results have to be related to findings from other fields. So part of external credibility is to be understood and relevant. Part of the external credibility is to be understood and relevant. That is not too complicated. But part of scientific credibility is to not making things too simple, but preserve the complexity. So expertise takes many forms and may meet different challenges. And one crucial is to be credible, both towards internal scientific community and that it represents and to target groups. Another is how to promote and foster researchers who acquire both contributory and interactional expertise. And with that, I will finish my presentation.